Okay, so this is an oral history interview for the CJAM Oral History Project, where we are celebrating 40 years on the FM dial. My name is Olivia Patricia, and I am sitting in the large production studio at CJAM. I'm on a Jitsu call with Chris White. It is currently Thursday, July 27th, 2023, and it is 1:58 p.m. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing incredibly well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Um, so I guess I was wondering if we could start off by where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Windsor, Ontario, and I
Um,
lived there for 30 years.
oh wow. And um, what kind of got you involved with CJAM?
I had kind of gone off after high school into like some wrong paths, into like didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life. And after like a failed attempt at college, I realized that I should just start following like things I'm passionate about. So I enrolled at the University of Windsor at the Communication Studies program and started volunteering at the campus newspaper and had a decent experience there, but it still didn't kind of satisfy like uh, my my passions. So I thought, okay, I'm aware of CJAM. I love music. Let me go see what that's about. Felt greeted and welcomed for my first visit, and then I stuck around for I don't know 10 years.
That's awesome. What made you interested in studying communications, media, and film?
I think because as a person, I was just interested in popular culture, music, cinema, and when I was in high school, I was always telling people that I was going to be a writer one day, or want to be a journalist of some kind. And so again, after trying my hand at print journalism, I didn't really feel like I found my voice that in that way. And I've always been like a shy person, so the idea of like being on air, talking to an audience, didn't really feel like something I could do. But at the same time, you got to take chances and you got to try new things. And I'm glad I did because I still think about my time at CJAM and look back fondly about everything about it.
That's amazing. So I guess your love for pop culture and music led you into CJAM. So I believe it was the year 2002 you started at the station.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Did you start off with doing any shows or anything?
Yeah, so I initially started with what they would call like the graveyard shift, like early morning. I think maybe like a 6 till 8 a.m. radio program, and it focused on a genre of music called math rock. But I would kind of branch out into other kind of subgenres of like post rock and other slightly experimental genres. And then I would usually just kind of like go home as soon as my show was done. But the current music director at the time, Adam Fox, started welcoming people to help out in the office. So I started doing data entry for the earshot charts on his behalf. And then he started looking for a hip hop music director to help on a volunteer basis. And so I took on that uh, role. So that's how I kind of started to get more involved with like the office side of things.
That's sick. I want to back up just a bit. What is math rock? I've never heard of that before.
All right. So math rock is just rock and roll music. Guitar, bass, drums, vocals, sometimes other supplementary instruments. That kind of works off of like weird time signatures. So like
Mm,
they'll be playing like a certain melody or pace at 1 minute, and then they'll just go off on like a totally different tangent.
that is so cool. So, anyways, you were getting involved with office work and helping with charts for earshot. I guess what led you to becoming the music director in 2007?
Helping out in the office and taking that initiative to help out on a volunteer basis. I believe when Adam decided to take on a different position, I think he might have been upgraded to the station manager, or he might have left for another opportunity. Um, the music director position was open for applications, and I feel like as somebody who had some knowledge of what he was doing, it helped me maybe take that extra, like a little bit of competitive advantage over other candidates who were applying at the time.
Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know what a music director does, could you kind of explain what your position was?
Sure. So at the time, submissions of music were coming in primarily through CDs. So you'd receive thousands of CDs every year, and it'd be your job to kind of filter through them, try to think about, is this something that CJAM programmers existing and in the future will want to play? And then kind of getting it into the music library. And at the time, I was starting to write a little bit of a like informal blog and supplementary weekly emails to the volunteers, where I kind of would try to review or summarize as many albums as possible that I thought would help them maybe take a chance on something new, other than just seeing like a cool piece of artwork on the CD cover or on the spine of the CD. So in addition to kind of getting music in and out of the on-air rotation, you would submit the charting data to Earshot, and CMJ in the United States was something we did at the time. And you'd also interact with the different publicists and people that were interested in knowing how the music was being received at the station, how often it was getting played. And then supplementary duties would be things like coordinating giveaways of concert tickets, CDs, and other things like that to the listeners, and also coordinating interviews with artists on behalf of the DJs.
That's sick. I guess what was the underground music scene like at the time you were music director?
In terms of like the Windsor music scene?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was really great. It seemed like there were always bands playing, a lot of people in multiple bands. One thing I liked about the Windsor music scene that I haven't, or maybe don't recall experiencing in London as much, and definitely don't feel the same in Kelowna, where I live currently, is that there were a lot of people working in different genres of music. In where I live right now, I often don't feel like I can get as much diversity of music as I would like to, in terms of like live music, and even recording of music. I don't feel like there's as many local artists releasing music here as there were back in Windsor in the time period that I lived there.
Nice. In 2009, we kind of switched from being 95.1 to 99.1. And that was a big time for the station. And you were staff at that time, and I was wondering, I guess, what was the feeling in the station when the news came that 95.1 might not be available anymore?
I do recall there was some uncertainty as to what would be the next opportunity. Like, were we in danger of losing an FM broadcasting license entirely? I believe there were conversations about possibly transitioning to an AM frequency if one existed. And I'm not certain of the particulars about how 99.1 became available or was identified as becoming available. But there was a lot of excitement once we were able to kind of transition, kind of like a fresh start, or a rebrand. And I feel like we were making some incremental improvements in terms of like how much fundraising we were doing each year. And I believe we kind of felt like the switch to 99.1 would help be like yet another opportunity to kind of like generate excitement amongst the people that were supporting the station, but also onboarding new people as well.
Mm-hmm. For anyone listening right now who's not too familiar with how fundraising works for community campus radio stations, I was wondering if you could just kind of explain like why fundraising is so important to these stations.
Well, it's been a little bit removed from the campus radio environment, like nationally, for a number of years now. But I feel like there's been certain stations that perhaps in Toronto, that were receiving funding from the university, and then that funding disappeared, leaving them to be in a very precarious situation because their funding from other sources like community fundraising wasn't as strong as maybe it could have been. And I feel like at CJAM, we were always pretty focused on asking for assistance and support from the listeners and the community, while also being very aware that the University of Windsor and other sources of fundraising might not always be there. So kind of drawing a blank there.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I just, the thing is you just want to have as much diversity of possible revenue sources as possible, just in case the worst possible scenario happens.
Mm-hmm. During your time at CJAM, I guess you were on staff for a decent amount of years, and you were around the station for almost 10. I guess, were there any roadblocks that the station faced? And if so, like, how did you guys overcome them?
I can't recall very many roadblocks. It felt like it was a pretty good period of time where things were running well, as staff were leaving the station for other opportunities. They always seemed like there was always somebody either volunteering or connected to the station that was ready to step up into the next role. I felt like our community partners were very consistent at supporting the station, and it felt like the audience and the listeners were always there. So I can't recall too much of a tumultuous time.
Oh, that's good. So since leaving CJAM, you've gone on to do quite a few other things. Can you explain kind of what you did after leaving your position as the music director?
Yes. So at a certain point, it felt like I had kind of experienced Windsor for long enough, and like I was kind of like feeling a little bit like I was doing the same things over and over again. So I wanted to just try something new. So on a whim, I applied for a master's degree, or a master's program at Western University in a program called Popular Music and Culture, because it seemed like the perfect fit. And I had no idea that that was even a possible subject for study. So
what sort of stuff did you learn doing like a master's in popular culture?
it was connected to the media studies department. So there was a lot of crossover to media studies, but on a very theoretical level. So it wasn't often clear as to like what certain courses were about and how they connected directly to popular music and culture. And it was also like crossover with like a lot of media studies students in our courses, and we were in their courses as well. And coming from being a few years removed from like an undergrad student, I felt like I wasn't totally prepared for it. I was a bit overwhelmed with like some of the readings that were being presented to us. Like they seemed so abstract and so disconnected from what I thought I was going to be studying that it wasn't always clear. But then there were opportunities where it was clear. So there was like courses on audio production, but more from the perspective like how music is made, more so than the experiences that I was having at CJAM, where like how is broadcast radio being made. And also there was music history courses. And then there was more of a free-form course where we just kind of like picked different topics that were tangentially connected to an idea, and we discussed them 1 week, and then we moved on to the next thing. So it was a pretty abstract at times.
That's so cool. Were you at all involved with the campus community radio station in London?
I was. So as a way to kind of feel like I had some connections to the music scene in London, I very early on went to CHRW, where I already knew their existing music director, and I started volunteering for them just in the office. And I kind of interacted with people that would come in for their radio shows and to help out in other ways at the station. And then when I was out at concerts and events in London, it started to introduce me to like, hey, I recognize that person. I have somebody I can go talk to. And eventually I started working and helping out as the music director at the station when their existing director left. And I also started doing radio shows on a fill-in basis there.
What sort of radio shows did you do?
I was doing just open format radio at the time, playing whatever I wanted. And I tried to kind of build off what I was doing before I left CJAM, which was never playing the same artist twice over the course of an entire year, to force myself to keep playing and keep expanding and finding new artists.
Mm-hmm. Why is it in like campus community radio that it's so important for us to share artists that no one has really heard before, or not play like too much of the same artist, I guess?
I think it's because there's so many people that are making music, and so many people that are making music that is just as good as what's being heard already. And there's definitely value to looking back in the past and playing artists that have released music throughout the history of the recorded music period, but not ignoring like the current voices. It needs to.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. You have to keep. I don't know. Like as society changes, so do the people that are making music. So do like the topics that are being covered in songs, and those need to be heard.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that during your time at CJAM, you helped out as a juror for the Polaris Music Prize.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. At all the interactions with the other jurors was done through a message board, so you weren't really meeting them in person necessarily and talking about music directly. You were just kind of like sharing messages amongst one another, and there were certain voices that were more active in the message boards, so it often felt like a little bit intimidating at times to like, I'm just the campus radio music director in Windsor. How am I going to share thoughts against somebody who's working at, say, the CBC or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that was just me being easily intimidated, or but at the same time, it felt like a really rewarding experience, because it was like during the first couple of years of the Polaris Music Prize existence.
That's so cool. And I guess one thing that I've really noticed when kind of like looking at what you've done and kind of preparing to like chat with you is that you've worked at a ton of not-for-profits. Of course, there was CJAM, the London Campus Community Radio Station. You've worked at the Aeolian Performing Arts Center, TAP Center for Creativity. Why is it so important for you that you work at these not-for-profits?
Well, I think one thing that helped me transition to everything else post CJAM in the not-for-profit world is that once you have experience in the not-for-profit environment, you kind of learn to love it. You kind of learn to appreciate the passion that the staff, volunteers, and other supporters have for what's going on at these organizations, and it just becomes infectious. And you kind of just want to be there. You kind of want to be around what other people are doing, because you feel that same passion as them.
That's amazing. Yeah, so you were at a performing arts center. I guess your experience with music really helped you get that sort of role. Can you explain what you did there?
Yes. So I was primarily responsible for booking the musicians that perform there. So where I was at CJAM communicating with publicists, now had to transition to a job where I was communicating with their booking agents and negotiating contracts and promoting the concerts, designing posters, everything down to like the final step when they arrive, and making sure that the green room is ready for them and has everything that they want to feel welcome and ready to perform a great show later that evening. And then at the end of the night, setting up the remainder of like the ticket sales and the finances that would be left unsettled until like all the final ticket sales were tabulated. But I was also at a not-for-profit organization. I was there to help manage the people that were volunteering, who were there because they had a passion for live music. So people that were working at the bar on a volunteer basis, people working at the front door collecting tickets in the box office, selling them, people working in backstage as security, and just making sure that they were having a positive experience while also helping the people that were there for the show as paying customers have a positive experience. So it was like running around quite a bit, never staying still in one spot, and having very long days, often like arriving at noon to work in the office and staying until like after midnight until when the concerts were finished.
That sounds like such an exciting role.
Yeah, it's a very exciting role for sure, but also one that led to burnout very quickly.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's hard to have like a personal life when you're at your work for so long. And during peak time for concerts is weekends and nights, which is also like the peak time when a lot of people want to have their own personal life and go out to see other concerts or do other things. So it was hard to kind of balance being at work during those times, but also feeling not like you were missing out on the life that you might have wanted to live outside of work too.
And after that, you worked as like the volunteer manager at the TAP Center for Creativity. Was your role at that organization along the same lines as the Aeolian? If I'm saying that right.
I would say it would be a little bit different. Where the Aeolian Performing Arts Center primarily had musicians from other cities coming to perform, the TAP Center was primarily community members that were passionate about visual art, live theater, spoken word poetry, music, using the space to put on the art and cultural activities that they were passionate about. So it wasn't so much as bringing in existing established talent as to providing a space for local talent do and display their passions, and then managing the volunteers that helped the building operate as efficiently as it needed to.
And I guess that's kind of similar to what CJAM does. How I know it's very important for us to help support new artists that are creating music and putting out like a song for the first time. So it's kind of cool how it kind of went a little circle for you.
Yeah, and as we were communicating through email, it got me thinking that one interesting thing about the TAP Center was that the diversity of the programming seemed to be comparable to the diversity of programming on CJAM, where it's not just music. You have people that are discussing politics. You have the cultural and community programmers that are discussing things that are relevant to their communities, and everything else that's on CJAM. It's not just music. It's not just news. It's whatever people want it to be.
Why do you feel like it's so important to have spaces like that in communities?
I might be connected to the fact that things like print media is not once what it once was. Sure, there are opportunities to present ideas now through social media. You can certainly write your own blog, but having one place where a diversity of ideas and opinions can be presented is interesting to me, because maybe someone is tuning into the radio station to hear music, but then it transitions to something else totally different, and it catches their interest, or it presents ideas and opportunities, or ideas and thoughts to them that they might not have been ready for, or might not have been expecting. So there's the element of surprise, I suppose, in addition to just having a nice centralized platform for people to express themselves.
Mm-hmm. And now you're working at UBC, the Kelowna branch. How's that been?
It's been a different experience entirely. I feel kind of disconnected from my passions a bit, because I can't talk about math rock with my colleagues. And even when we talk about music and things like that, it's not, my interests aren't always like aligning with my colleagues, which is fine. Everyone, has their own interests. And as I expressed earlier too, things that are happening in Kelowna, aren't always aligning with my interests, because it's a bit of a remote location compared to the Windsor area, where you've got access to Detroit by public transit or driving, and like all the opportunities that exist there. You also have Toronto and London so nearby and easily accessible through things like a bus and trains. But to get to Vancouver from Kelowna, it's not as easy. It's a bit longer, a bit more costly, and even like the closer cities surrounding Kelowna, they're not as I don't know, from my perspective or my feeling, not as diverse as the experiences that I was having in Windsor and the surrounding areas.
What's the music scene like in Kelowna, if you're at all involved or go to shows there?
Okay, it's getting better. I've noticed over the past year, there's a couple people that are actively putting on punk metal shows. They're bringing in artists that are somewhat well known that I recognize, but then there's a lot of artists that I've never heard before. And I like to think that I'm still slightly aware of like what's going on in terms of new artists. So to see bands that I've never heard of coming to the city, paired up with bands that I recognize that band, it's exciting. And they're doing shows in places that aren't necessarily music venues, because we don't have a lot of music venues in the city at the moment. And not a lot of performing art spaces either. So it's really great to see that people are finding ways to get live music to Kelowna.
That's amazing. I love how, especially just with musicians and artists, even if there aren't those spaces that are set aside for them, they persevere and they create their own spaces, in a conventional or even in like an unconventional way.
For sure. And I'm even seeing like all ages shows, which is amazing to see, because I feel like live music, to experience that as soon as possible, it kind of helps foster the idea of like, I want to do that, or I want to try that. I want to have my voice heard. This is creative expression that appeals to me. I can do this. And I feel like I didn't really get to see that until maybe I was like of legal drinking age.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I did, it was like, hey, made it. I can probably do this, or I want to be around this more often.
Yeah, I know I can definitely relate to that, because I didn't start getting involved in music scenes until I was 19, because it was closed off to me. So, yeah. I have a couple more questions before we wrap up. One of which I've been asking almost every single person I've interviewed. But do you have any special or silly memories or stories from your time at the station that you would want to share?
Well, I remember the fundraising events always being fantastic. It's like just the amount of energy going on throughout the station as you're getting ready to go on and take over and help. But also like once you're in the on-air studio, not wanting to leave because the next broadcaster that's coming in after you is like your friend, and you want to stick around and hang out with them and like really express support for them. So during the fundraisers, it really felt like everyone was in it together. But also just really sentimental about CJAM. I think about it all the time. During the pandemic, when I was recognizing that it wasn't always easy for people to kind of come in and do radio shows, I thought about reaching out to the music director and saying, hey, can I pitch you like a pre-recorded show? Because I miss just being in the on-air booth, miss selecting music, sharing enthusiasm about what I'm playing with an audience. And I just miss the people as well. There's just really small memories that you can think of at the time, like unimportant moments, like of just like talking to somebody, but looking back on it, remembering the relationships that you're building up and like how positive and optimistic the people were that you were surrounded by.
That is so special. I guess I have one more question, and that's for, do you have any, I guess, like advice for someone who might be interested in getting involved with campus community radio?
Yeah, I would say just do it. Don't be afraid. Trust that the people that are working at CJAM and volunteering at CJAM are going to welcome you, and even if you're not feeling it right away, still give it a chance. Find that spot within the station that really meshes with what you're passionate about, and keep going at it. Because working and volunteering at CJAM led to a lot of really great post CJAM experiences for me that I don't know would have been possible without it. Like grad school, for instance, it was an amazing time in my life, and I'm pretty certain that my application might not have been accepted. They were like really struggling to find like the last person to accept into the program. And I think having CJAM on my application really helped, and then it unlocked the great experiences that came after it. So yeah, just don't be timid like me.
That's great advice. Chris, thank you so much for making the time out of your day to sit down and chat with me about this special time in your life. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great to chat.
Take care.